So one-inch punch, Bruce did this in 1964 at the Long Beach International Karate Tournaments, that you can generate power with speed and technique.
As one of the most popularly acclaimed martial artists in the history of Hollywood, people have always wondered whether or not Bruce Lee was superhuman. With his animated fighting style and his facial expressions, Bruce Lee had taken the industry by a storm. Years after his death, evidence has surfaced that he was not just a strong fighter, he was practically superhuman. What is the evidence, and how does it affect what we know about this legend? Join us as we take a deep dive into this juicy topic. The man who broke the rules of physics. At only 140 pounds and wearing size 7.5 shoes, Bruce Lee should have been a very ordinary guy. He was short for a fighter. He was skinny compared to the heavyweights of his era. His eyesight was so incredibly poor that the U.S. Army officially disqualified him from service, labeling him medically unfit to carry a rifle. On paper, Bruce Lee was a man defined by physical limitations. But in the real world, he showed us what a real-life superhuman looks like. We aren't talking about movie magic or clever camera tricks here. We are talking about documented, filmed, and witnessed evidence of a human being who could launch grown men across a room from only 1 inch away. We are talking about a man who could support his entire body weight on just 2 fingers while having a calm, philosophical conversation about the universe. This raises a question that makes many people feel very uncomfortable. Was Bruce Lee just an elite athlete who trained harder than everyone else? Or was he something truly beyond human? The truth is shocking. For decades, skeptics have tried to find the trick to his power. They have gone back and looked for hidden wires in the old black and white footage from the 1960s. They have looked for springs hidden under the floors of his dojos. They have searched for any explanation that fits within our normal understanding of physics. But they found nothing, because the truth is much more intense. Bruce Lee spent every single second of his life turning his physical form into a high-speed, high-output machine. He moved so fast that cameras designed to capture human movement literally could not see his strikes. He hit with so much force that he broke the scientific equipment used to measure impact. Of all the muscles in the body, Lee was most concerned with building up his core, as he believed that the core, stomach area, is used in almost all movements, hence was greatly important to martial arts. In his quest to improve his core strength, Lee invented something now known as the dragon flag, in his honor. If you couldn't guess already, it's considered one of the most difficult core exercises out there, because Lee didn't mess around. Sylvester Stallone may have brought the move to people's attention in Rocky IV, but Lee took it to another level, reportedly being able to support his entire frame on the edge of a bench, with only his shoulders touching anything, all while the rest of his body remained perfectly rigid and horizontal to the ground. Everything about that move was almost humanly impossible. But there are even more shocking things about him. The 1-inch punch. The most famous thing Bruce Lee ever did in public happened in 1964 at the Long Beach International Karate Championships. A man named Bob Baker stood in front of the crowd. Now, Baker was a big guy, a serious martial artist, and a total skeptic. He told the audience he had seen every fake martial arts trick in the book. He volunteered to stand in front of Bruce Lee because he assumed it was all a con, another guy pretending to have mystical powers that didn't actually exist. Nothing could have prepared the crowd for what happened next. Bruce placed his fist against Baker's chest. There was exactly 1 inch of space between his knuckles and the man's ribs. Bruce didn't pull his arm back to gain momentum. He didn't wind up his shoulder. He didn't move his arm more than that single inch. But in a split second, Baker flew backward as if he had been struck by a speeding car. He didn't just stumble, he was launched off his feet, crashing into a chair that was the only thing stopping him from hitting the back wall. The crowd went totally silent. They had just watched someone do the impossible. Every boxer and every street fighter knows that punches need distance to build power. You need to swing your arm. You need a runway for your fist to pick up speed. Bruce Lee proved everyone wrong. Years later, a biomechanics researcher at Stanford named Jessica Rose spent months analyzing the footage. Her computer models kept coming back with results that seemed wrong. Bruce had generated over 1,500 newtons of force from that tiny movement. That is more than enough power to snap human ribs like dry breadsticks. The secret wasn't actually in his arm muscles. The power started in his back foot. pressed firmly against the floor. He used the ground as a springboard, pushing against the earth itself. That force traveled up his calf, twisted through his thigh, accelerated through a violent hip rotation, whipped through his core, and finally exploded out of his fist. Every single muscle fiber in his body fired in a perfect, synchronized sequence. Most professional fighters only use about 30% of their potential power because their muscle groups work against each other. Bruce Lee spent 15 years learning how to make 100% of his muscles work as one single devastating wave. Hundreds of martial artists have tried to copy this since 1964. Some can push a person back a few feet, but nobody has ever matched that original bone-crushing explosion. The speed that broke the cameras. In 1966, Bruce Lee got his big break on a TV show called The Green Hornet.
Let's make our move.
The Green Hornet!
The director of the show was a man named William Bowden. Bowden had been making movies since the silent film era. He had worked with the biggest stars and seen every trick in the book. But when Bruce Lee threw his first punch on the set, the film came back from the lab looking like it was broken. In the footage, Bruce would be standing perfectly still in one frame, and then in the very next frame, the stuntman was already flying through the air. There was no movement captured in between those 2 points. The camera crew was confused. They spent hours checking their equipment, thinking the lenses were bad or the film was slipping. But the problem wasn't the cameras. At the time, film was running at frames per second. Bruce Lee was completing his entire punch arc, from his side to the target and back, in less than 1/24th of a second. He was literally moving between the frames of the film. He was invisible to the technology of the 1960s. With Bruce's superhuman speed, the producers of the show faced a very weird problem. They had hired the most skilled martial artist in America, yet the television audience couldn't see what made him special. They actually had to go to Bruce and ask him to slow down. They told him to move at half speed so the cameras could actually catch the blur of his movement. For a man who spent his whole life trying to be faster, being told to be slow felt like a failure, but he did it for the sake of the show. It didn't end there. To prove he wasn't just movie fast, Bruce used to do a famous coin trick for his friends.
Watch closely.
It's gone!
And here.
No way! Ha! Ha! Ha!
He would have a person hold a dime in their wide-open palm. He would stand 3 feet away, which is outside of normal hitting range. He told them to snap their hand shut the very second they saw him move his body. The person would nod, feeling very confident that they could close their hand faster than a man could move 3 feet. Bruce would twitch, the person would snap their hand shut, and they would feel the metal coin safe inside. But when they opened their hand, the dime was gone. In its place was a copper penny. Bruce had crossed the room, opened their hand, swapped the coins, and moved back to his starting spot before their brain could even send the signal to their fingers to close. His speed was simply faster than the human nervous system could process. Moreover, in his time, Lee used a multitude of custom-built exercise machines that were usually created just for him by a close friend, James Lee. Some of them were made due to requests from Lee himself. Others were built out of sheer necessity. Lee's heavy bag is an example of the latter. The reason he customized his heavy bag will shock you. Coming from an unknown source, Lee's custom heavy bag literally taunted others with its immense size. Normal heavy bags clock in at around 70 pounds, with some clocking in at a much meatier 150. Lee weighed 300 pounds, and it was filled with metal, not because he was showing off, but because he literally couldn't use a lighter, non-metallic one without breaking it. There are conflicted and often confused stories that claim Lee was able to kick a heavy bag clear through the ceiling. The fight that changed the world, Bruce versus Wong Jackman. Bruce Lee didn't just wake up with these superhuman powers. He was a man obsessed with results over tradition. In 1964, a master named Wong Jackman arrived at Bruce's school in Oakland. He brought a written challenge from the old masters in San Francisco's Chinatown. They were angry because Bruce was teaching secret Chinese martial arts to non-Chinese students. They told him to stop teaching white and black students, or he would have to fight their champion. Bruce read the document, laughed, and told Wong Jackman to start his warm-up. What happened next became the most debated fight in history. Some say it lasted 3 minutes, Wong Jackman claimed it went 20, but Bruce's wife, Linda, says the fight ended with Bruce chasing Wong around the room because the traditional master couldn't handle Bruce's pressure. Bruce won the fight, but he went home that night feeling like he had lost. He was out of breath. He felt that his traditional Wing Chun techniques were too limited. He felt that his classical training had failed him in a real chaotic fight. That night was the birth of a legend. Bruce decided to throw away thousands of years of tradition. He stopped caring about what was classical and started caring about what was functional. He bought over 2,500 books on every subject related to the human body: anatomy, kinesiology, bodybuilding, fencing, and Western boxing. He turned his garage into a high-tech laboratory. He started lifting weights with bodybuilding champions. He focused on building attributes instead of techniques. He studied fighting like an engineer studies a bridge. He wanted to know exactly how much force a human bone could take and exactly how much speed a muscle could produce. He threw away the rigid stances of the past and replaced them with the footwork of a fencer and the head movement of a boxer. He called his new way of fighting Jeet Kune Do, or the way of the intercepting fist. In 1967, he took all of his old martial arts certificates and belts and dumped them into a trash can, lighting them on fire. He told his students that the classical mess was dead. He wanted them to be like water, able to flow through any gap or crash with the force of a tidal wave. Iron fingers and superhuman density. One of the most visual proofs of Bruce Lee's superhuman conditioning was his hands. Most people struggled to do 10 push-ups on their palms. Bruce Lee could do 200 push-ups using only 2 fingers on one hand. That means each of those 2 fingers was supporting about 40 pounds of shifting body weight with every single rep. He could do this while talking normally, without his voice wavering or his breath getting heavy. This was just his warm-up. This level of strength came from a routine that would break a normal person. Every morning at 5 a.m., Bruce would drive his fingertips into a bucket of coarse sand 500 times. He wasn't just poking it, he was striking it with full force. When the sand got too easy, he switched to a bucket of gravel. The sharp stones tore his skin and made his fingers bleed every single day. Most people would have developed permanent nerve damage or crippled hands, but Bruce's body adapted. He eventually switched to a bucket of steel ball bearings. He eventually developed bone density that doctors later said was completely off the charts. His tendons had thickened until they were like steel cables. The points where his muscles attached to his bones had actually grown larger and stronger to handle the massive amounts of force his body was producing. In 1969, he demonstrated what those iron fingers could do. He held a 1-inch thick piece of solid oak wood. He didn't take a big swing or a wind-up. He simply placed his fingertips against the wood and pushed. He drove his hand straight through the board like it was made of wet tissue paper. It didn't make a loud crack. It made a sound like someone tearing a piece of heavy fabric. Witnesses were so shocked they thought the wood must have been pre-cut or weakened. But Bruce let them bring their own wood from home, and the result was always the same. He had turned his hands into organic spears that could pierce solid objects. But despite all his strength, Bruce Lee had one shocking secret. The secret weakness, the blind dragon. Here is the secret that makes Bruce Lee's story even more incredible. He was almost legally blind. Bruce had a condition called -5 diopters in both eyes. This meant that anything further away than his own arm was just a blurry mess of colors and shapes. When he went to the U.S. Army for his physical exam in 1963, the doctors were shocked. They told him his vision was so bad, he was medically unfit to serve. Most people would think that being a world-class fighter with bad eyesight is impossible. If you can't see a punch coming, you can't block it. But Bruce Lee did what he always did. He turned a weakness into his greatest weapon. Because he couldn't rely on clear vision, he trained his other senses to a superhuman level. He learned to read an opponent's body instead of their face. He watched for the tiny tells that happened before a move. He saw the way a shoulder dropped a 1/4 of an inch before a punch was thrown. He felt the way the air pressure changed in the room when an arm moved toward him. His students said sparring with Bruce was like fighting someone who had radar. He could sense where you were, even if he wasn't looking at you. He became a master of a drill called Chi Sao, or sticky hands. In this drill, you stay in constant contact with your opponent's arms. Bruce reached a level where he could fight entire matches while wearing a dark blindfold. He would feel the tiny muscle tensions in your arm and know exactly what you were going to do before you even knew you were going to do it. He would redirect your force and hit you before you could finish your own attack. He proved that you don't need perfect eyes if you have a perfect mind and a body that is tuned to the vibrations of the world around it. People often ask how a 140-pound man could have so much power. The answer lies in his lat muscles, the muscles on the sides of the back. Bruce Lee's lats were so large that when he tensed them, he looked like a cobra ready to strike. He could take a 300-pound heavy bag, a bag that most professional fighters can barely move with their strongest kicks, and launch it into the air with a simple side kick. Witnesses say that when Bruce kicked the bag, it didn't just swing, it would fly up until it was parallel with the ceiling. The heavy steel chains holding the bag would go completely slack because the force of the kick was so high. He could do this over and over again, for minutes at a time, without ever losing power. He once kicked a man who was wearing a protective chest plate so hard that the man flew back and broke his arm when he landed. This wasn't just strength, in the way a weightlifter has strength. This was explosive power, the ability to dump every ounce of energy in the body into a single point in a fraction of a second. Bruce Lee passed away in 1973.
Martial arts star Bruce Lee has died, not a projectile. Police are investigating but don't suspect foul play.
Only 4 days before his masterpiece film, Enter the Dragon, was released in America. He was only 32 years old, but in those 32 years, he did more than most people do in a century. He took a small, nearsighted, ordinary body and turned it into the most efficient and terrifying fighting machine the world has ever seen. He showed us that being superhuman isn't about being born with a cape or coming from another planet. It is about a level of focus and discipline that is almost frightening. He didn't just practice martial arts, he became martial arts. He didn't accept the limits that the army, the old masters, or his own biology tried to put on him. He smashed through every single plateau he encountered. When we look at the evidence of the 1,500 newtons of force from an inch away, the speed that moved between the frames of a camera, the fingers that pierced oak, and the blindfolded awareness, we are looking at a man who was operating on a different frequency. Bruce Lee once told his students that if you always put limits on what you can do, physically or anything else, it will spread into your work and into your life. He said there are no limits, only plateaus, and you must not stay there. You must go beyond them. He lived every single day of his life by those words. He wasn't just a movie star, and he wasn't just a guy who knew how to fight. He was a real-life superhuman who showed the rest of us that our only real limits are the ones we choose to believe in. What do you think was Bruce Lee's most incredible feat? Was it the speed, the raw power, or the fact that he did it all while being almost blind? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.